let's talk about OKKO Let's Be Heroes. I've talked about this show once before, a long time ago, when I covered the infamous Let's Not Be Skeletons. It was one of those randomly politically charged episodes about boomstick control, and I had a lot to say about that episode in particular. However, one thing I didn't say much in that review was about the show overall, and that was probably a failure on my end because whether you liked the episode, hated the episode, or liked the message but hated the episode, I think we can all agree that was a particularly poor representation of OKKO. So, what is OKKO? Weird. OKKO is a weird show. And I don't just mean that in a cartoons are weird kind of way. It's a very hyperactive show. We have another Pixie Sticks one here tonight, and each episode feels like it's going a million miles per hour. By the end of each 11-minute segment, you'll feel like you were sitting there for an entire movie. It seems to take a lot of influence from Steven Universe in particular. Our main character, KO, is the short kid who looks up to the heroes around him. He can be a little bit loud and obnoxious, but he has a really good heart, to the point where he had the heart ring in the Captain Planet crossover. Speaking of influence though, this show takes a lot of the things that people didn't like about Steven Universe. If you didn't like that show's constant animation errors, the inconsistent style, the inconsistent scale, characters being off-model, then you are not going to like it here. Because OKKO elevates that style of making a show to an art form. Some people don't mind it, but I know that this can be a very big deal for a lot of people. Especially since this show can look even rougher than Steven Universe did. That said, I've seen a lot worse. The hyperactive comedy of the show is very reminiscent of other CN shows at the time, like Teen Titans Go, which is certainly interesting, since this show came out when the hatred towards that show was at its highest. All of this combined makes it sound like OKKO was designed to be disliked by people who have been most alienated by Cartoon Network during the mid to late 2010s. On the other hand, OKKO is one of the most nerdy shows that I have ever seen, and I mean that in its positive context, by the way. I mentioned that this show had a Captain Planet crossover, a property that's basically been a meme since the late 90s, and OKKO goes all out with it. Not only is it actually Captain Planet, screw you Planetina, but they got the same voice actors as well.
I see your taste in perfume hasn't changed, Dr. Blight. It really stinks.
Captain Planet! It's been a while, you planet-saving pest!
Even Captain Planet's humor is right out of the original 90s show. The design is a little bit weird here, but this is a Captain Planet episode with OKKO pacing. This isn't the kind of show to just reference Marvel or Star Wars like any other show from the 2010s would. I mean, it does reference Star Wars.
Sorry, KO. I am your father.
No!
But it also references everything from Action 52 to Dexter's Laboratory. In all of my years, I never thought that I would see the girls from Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, but here's OKKO saying, let's bring them back for an episode. People often refer to fan service as giggity 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 giggity. But if you're a fan of anything, from animation, video games, just nerd culture in general, OKKO Let's Be Heroes has plenty of service for you. And that brings us to the most famous episode of the entire show, and one that people have been telling me to check out for years. Crossover Nexus. This episode was made for Cartoon Network's 25th anniversary, and the universal consensus is that it was better than anything the network actually did. This episode has OKKO's biggest strength at its best. To put it as simply as I can, Crossover Nexus is a celebration of the network and its entire history, to the point that the episode itself abbreviates to CN. The most powerful heroes in the multiverse have been transported to a strange new world. Said heroes just coincidentally come from the shows that were currently airing at the time. Ben Tennyson, Raven from Teen Titans, Garnet of the Crystal Gems, and a plucky little hero named KO. They've all been brought here by a man named Strike, who is looking for a fight. And this strange new world? CN City. Now that's something I didn't expect to see again ever. Some people might be a little bit disappointed to see that the Go incarnations of Raven and the 2016 version of Ben are the ones that got to be in the crossover, and not their original versions, but in my view, I don't really find it a problem. These two characterizations actually wouldn't feel too out of place in their original inception, for the most part.
Choppy fish! Everyone hold on to my super strong legs.
If you know, you know. If you don't, thank your lucky stars and don't look it up. A nice little touch here is the villain tries to stone each and every one of the heroes via hitting them with this red X, basically canceling them. It's a very meta thing. Strike here isn't just killing these characters, he's getting your favorite shows canceled. I can't think of anyone else to be a better villain for an episode like this. So let's talk about the big meat of the episode, the references. This episode pays homage to almost every single show that ever aired on Cartoon Network, from the big famous ones like Ed, Edd n Eddy or Adventure Time, to some of the more obscure ones like I Am Weasel. It doesn't matter if the show was loved like Samurai Jack or hated like Problem Solvers. Almost every single show has representation, Class of 3000 being the most notable exception. It could take me an hour to list all of the references in this episode. Most of these come across in the stone statue scene, and right there, people usually have a few thoughts. It's not exactly the most believable that Strike could have beaten all of these characters. Superheroes, action stars, reality warpers, and sheep. We can all agree, it doesn't matter who you are, you ain't beating sheep. In all seriousness, to make that criticism, it looks a little bit like looking a gift horse in the mouth. It's been a long time since I'd even heard mention of some of these characters. Not just from the network, but in general culture. Some of these characters are so obscure that even I don't know who they are. And you know, it's much more respect than the network itself is going to give these characters. For what it's worth though, I think that the team really did their research on this one. The layout of CN City is basically shot for shot with the original bumpers. They certainly understand plenty of the shows that we're currently airing, like Garnet's Future Vision and Ben's Omnitrix. And they understand a little bit more than a lot of people complaining about this episode do. I've heard that a lot of people complain during the final montage where Ben is changing to a bunch of other CN characters, because one of them is Ed from Ed, Edd n Eddy, who is a pacifist. Ed definitely is a pacifist, but this is Ben in the form of Ed, and Ben is never a pacifist. So it's not actually out of character. Even ignoring that, the jingle here while this is going on would make any inaccuracies worth it for me anyway. It's been a long time since I've gotten a good shot of nostalgia like that. The more cynical viewer might see this episode as just nothing more than gratuitous, pointless fan service. I know that complaint comes up with things like this or Ready Player One. To that, all I have to say is, what's wrong with fan service once in a while? It's strange that fan service has gotten such a negative connotation these days. I understand that stereotypical fan service is of a certain nature, and I understand that it can grind the plot to a screeching halt and be distracting. But in the raw sense of, this show is doing something that its fans like and want to see and will appreciate, standing against that sounds like a very weird position to take. Granted, fan service, like anything, can be overdone, but I don't think that that's the case here. Even ignoring the fact that this was for Cartoon Network's 25th, the episode was built around showcasing all of these cameos. It has a fully structured plot that it never takes digressions from, and it only rarely stops and winks at the audience. I also love how, for a lack of a better word, egalitarian this episode is. The episode shows CN City in a dour state, it's been destroyed, and it would be so easy, like the easiest thing in the world, to get into this old versus new mentality. Cartoon Network wasn't exactly in as good a place as it was in the 90s and early 2000s, but the fact that they have the modern characters save the day, with the aid and the memory of the older characters, it just shows an appreciation for the entire history of the network. Like I said, it doesn't matter how loved or hated a show was, it got its representation, which is a wonderful extra touch. OKKO at its default usually isn't my style. It's another show that's just too fast-paced for me, but I have to admit, I really do love this episode in particular. Me personally, I only have one real complaint about it. I think the episode's too short.